All right. So I am doing my final on a literature review on identity in second language learners, primarily with a focus on Mandarin speakers, or Mandarin speakers learning English as a second language compared to English native speakers. Um, so a little bit of an introduction. My readings found that China is one of the best places to study English as a lingua franca due to the amount of learners. There's over 1,000 million native Mandarin speakers, and out of that number, there's about 10 million that can understand English. And then when looking at identity, it's important to note that this is the way a person relates themselves to the rest of the world, including like their vision for the future. And then when looking at the amount of native Mandarin speakers learning English, there should be an interesting correlation or connection to identity. So my thesis was that I'll be looking at several resources to see the ways Mandarin speakers' linguistic and cultural identities are affected, if at all, by learning English as a second language compared to their English counterparts. So I started off with a little background of what is a language identity. So a linguistic identity refers to the ideology that a person having a new or altered identity with this progression of more than one language. A linguistic identity often allows for individuals to connect to the people around them, the world around them, and the languages as well around them. Oftentimes, people have different faces for when they are speaking a certain language, often in an attempt to fit in or free themselves from the constraints of their native language. Oftentimes, that are high stake have higher national levels of language recognition. And when people learn about Mandarin, they often think it's a very strict language, and this could have to do with the country's economic and political influence of the world. And so these are the key points in the language identity that I'll be talking about. There are several different types of language identity issues that we kind of see. And so this is just a little background before I get into the ones that I found in like research. So the students were able to change their language identity through the means of a second language due to the fact that they were finding the need to fit into the community around them. We see this as a language identity shift, primarily known as intercultural identity. Um, other identities could be caused, Other identity issues could be caused by resistance to learning the L2 due to the fact that it may clash with like a learner's belief or language system, otherwise known as language resistance, which we talked about in class. And the opposite of this is when an L2 is beginning to take over your sense of identity and you no longer feel connected to your L1, known as language slippage or language reconstruction, which we also discussed in class. And oftentimes people learn a second language in order to fulfill their dream of self or a dream life, which is known as the imagined self. These language identities are fundamentally important to understanding the importance of Mandarin speakers learning English, um, because without understanding all the different types of identity issues, we wouldn't really be able to look at how identity shapes these learners. So with that being said, we'll look at what I found in studies. So there's a study that showed that students wish to speak with an English accent seem more positive in their English studies, almost as if to show off their English skills. And those who did not were often low in self-esteem about their English skills. And so this has to do with native speakerism, which is pretty common in China, where you want to sound exactly like a native speaker. You want to sound like you're not a second language learner. And so the study was looking at a group of students in Hong Kong, and it found that the students that were able to copy an American accent um, were much more confident in their English classes than those who were not. Um, and there is a university student who did her study in China, and she's a Chinese American, and she found that her own language and cultural identities were slipping while studying in China due to the very different expectations around her. Therefore, the fact that she was an English-speaking Chinese American created a negative advantage in mainland China in regards to her Chinese ancestry, um, but her Chinese identity in America created a negative effect as well due to the racial differences in the United States. So it was almost as if she was too American in China, but she was too Chinese in America, which left her very kind of confused within the study because it really showed, like, the differences of identities that she had. And then within the study, the participants found, so this is gonna be a study that was done, on, Asian Americans, who were living in the United States, and it said, within the study, the participants found that Asian men in America struggled more with their identities due to the sudden shift of expectations. Asian males in America were often more focused on their masculinity rather than their schooling due to the societal pressures around them. And this also has to do with like a shift from what is expected within societies. And then I compared this to native English speakers, and when comparing Mandarin speakers learning English to native English American speakers, it can often be overlooked within the American perspective, taking into account that native English American speakers think of language in different ways compared to second language speakers is vitally important to understanding the relationship between the two. The Mandarin speakers found that when looking to their American peers, uh, that being able to see their linguistic identities benefited them within learning their own language and cultural identity. This creates the ideology that in order to grasp the language connection to identity, it is important to be immersed in the language's culture and experience and use of language firsthand. So the examples from Mandarin speakers learning English are used throughout the paper as a basis of illustration of the thesis statement. The use of Mandarin speakers supports the idea of identity due to the large differences in Mandarin and English within their respective cultural and national settings. The learning of English as a second language can create both a sense of freedom within a language identity due to the high individualism community seen within the United States compared to that of mainland China. And that are is the end of my presentation. These are my references.